The only person who ever called Alpha King Cassian Veilheart, poor darling, was an Omega who believed he was a homeless wolf. By sunset, half the kingdom would be searching for him. Elara Rin knew none of that when she entered the abandoned apple orchard beneath a silver winter sky. Snow clung to the twisted branches in soft white ribbons. Meltwater whispered beneath the roots, and the evening air smelled of wet bark, bruised apples, and distant chimney smoke. Elara carried a wicker basket against her hip, searching for willow bark to ease old Martha Bell's aching joints before nightfall. She had nearly filled the basket when a low sound stopped her. It was not quite a growl. It sounded more like breath dragged painfully through a wounded chest. Elara turned toward a collapsed stone wall where dead leaves trembled, although the wind had suddenly gone still around her entirely. Behind the wall, a black wolf lay between the roots of the oldest apple tree. He was enormous, larger than any wild wolf had a right to be. His coat shone blue-black beneath the snow, except for a narrow silver streak crossing his powerful chest like moonlight on water itself. One pale silver eye opened as she approached, his lips pulled back, revealing teeth made for battle. Elara should have run. Instead, she noticed the blood darkening his shoulder, and the way his claws had buried themselves in the frozen earth, as though he feared himself more than her presence. "Oh," she whispered, lowering her basket. "You poor darling." The wolf stared at her with such offended dignity that Elara almost smiled. "Yes, I know. You are very frightening." She crouched several feet away. "But frightening creatures can still have terrible evenings, can't they?" His ear twitched once. Deep behind those silver eyes, Cassian Veilheart fought the poison burning through his blood. Black Wolfsbane had forced his shift and turned every scent into a threat. He had fled his guards before his wolf could harm them. Now this small Omega smelled like honey, apple blossoms, and impossible safety. Elara slowly removed her woolen scarf. "I'm going to put this over you," she explained, as if speaking to a stubborn neighbor. "Please do not bite me. I only own one good coat, and blood is difficult to wash out." Cassian's growl faded before the scarf touched his fur. The instant her scent surrounded him, the savage pressure inside his skull loosened. His claws released the earth, his breathing slowed, and, beneath the poison, beneath years of discipline and loneliness, his wolf lifted its head and recognized one quiet truth. "Mate." Elara merely sighed with relief. "There. Much better, sweetheart." Moving him proved less graceful. Elara tied two fallen branches together with rope and spread her cloak across them. After considerable pushing, pulling, and one deeply unhelpful stare from Cassian, she managed to slide him onto the makeshift sled. The branches cracked immediately beneath his weight and collapsed flat underneath. Elara stood in the snow with both hands on her hips. Cassian remained half wrapped in her cloak, looking insultingly regal for someone lying on broken sticks. "You could help a little," she told him. His silver eyes narrowed. "Wonderful, now we are both offended." His tail flicked. Perhaps pride accomplished what strength could not. Cassian forced himself upright and took 3 unsteady steps. Elara brightened. "See? We make an excellent team." He gave her a look suggesting otherwise, then his legs failed. He dropped directly onto the blankets she had arranged beside the sled. "Dignified," she said. By the time they reached her cottage, dusk had deepened into blue shadow. Firelight soon warmed the small room, turning copper pots golden and filling the air with cedar smoke. Elara cleaned his wound, speaking softly whenever his muscles tightened beneath her careful hands beside the hearth that cold evening. "You have carried something heavy for a long time," she murmured. Cassian watched her through half-closed eyes. No healer had ever touched him without fear. No noble had offered kindness without calculation. Yet Elara expected nothing from him, except perhaps cooperation and fewer holes in her oldest blanket tonight. At last, exhaustion overcame him. Elara settled beside the fire, one hand resting lightly between his ears. "Sleep, poor darling," she whispered. "No one will hurt you here." For the first time in years, the Alpha King slept deeply. Outside, a cloaked man found Cassian's crest and smiled coldly. Morning entered Elara's cottage quietly. A pale ribbon of sunlight slipped through the frost-covered window and stretched across the wooden floor. The fire had burned low during the night, leaving only a bed of red embers and the warm scent of cedar smoke. Elara woke with her cheek against the arm of the rocking chair. For several sleepy seconds, she forgot why her neck hurt. Then, something heavy moved beneath her hand. She looked down. The enormous black wolf was awake. His silver eyes watched her from beneath the old wool blanket, calm but far too intelligent for an ordinary animal. Alara's fingers were still buried in the thick fur between his ears. She slowly pulled her hand away. "Good morning." One black ear moved. "You survived." The wolf looked offended. Alara smiled. That was meant to be encouraging. Cassian remained still while she knelt beside him and examined the wound on his shoulder. The bleeding had stopped, but the flesh around it remained swollen from the silver that had grazed him. Heat rolled from beneath his fur in uneven waves. "You still have a fever." He closed his eyes. "That does not make the fever disappear." One eye opened again. Alara stood and crossed to the kitchen table, where dried herbs waited beside a stone mortar. She crushed willow bark, feverfew, and a small amount of moonmint into a fine powder. Soon, the cottage filled with a sharp, earthy scent. Cassian lifted his head. His expression changed immediately. Suspicion narrowed his eyes. Alara glanced over her shoulder. "Do not start." The Alpha King had negotiated with hostile pack leaders, survived 3 border wars, and once stood alone before an army of rogues without showing fear. Yet the bitter smell rising from Alara's medicine filled him with deep concern. She mixed the herbs with warm water and carried the bowl toward him. "Drink." Cassian turned his head away. Alara stopped. "Did you just refuse?" He stared at the wall. She moved the bowl in front of his nose. He turned toward the fireplace. Alara followed. He turned back toward the wall. For a long moment, the gentle Omega and the most powerful wolf in the Northreach Kingdom engaged in a silent battle of patience. Alara finally sighed. "You are behaving like Mrs. Bell's 6-year-old grandson." Cassian's ears flattened. "At least Tomas only hides under the table." The wolf gave her a cold look. "Yes, I know, you are too large to fit." She returned to the kitchen and poured the medicine into a bowl of warm chicken broth. When she placed it beside him, Cassian sniffed carefully. Alara folded her arms. "I changed nothing." He looked at her. "That is ordinary broth." His silver eyes dropped to the bowl. "And I am a terribly liar." Cassian continued staring. Alara's expression softened. "Please." The single word carried no command, only concern. Something inside him yielded. He lowered his head and drank. Alara smiled as though he had accomplished something heroic. "There. You see? Not so terrible." It was terrible. Cassian finished every drop anyway. By midday, snow had begun falling again. Soft flakes drifted beyond the windows, slowly covering the narrow path leading toward the village. Alara worked at the table, repairing an old green coat for Marthabel. Each time she looked toward the fireplace, she found the wolf watching the door. "You can sleep," she told him. "No one comes this far into the orchard during winter." Cassian did not move. He smelled strangers in the distant forest. Royal guards. His guards. They were searching carefully, following traces of blood through the snow. Cassian should have called to them. He should have returned to the palace before the council discovered how badly the poison had affected him. Instead, he looked at Alara. She had tucked a loose strand of brown hair behind one ear, while concentrating on a crooked seam. Her lips moved silently as she counted stitches. A small wrinkle appeared between her brows whenever the thread refused to cooperate. The cottage was modest. The roof creaked in the wind. One chair had a shorter leg than the others. Yet it felt warmer than any room in Veilheart Palace. Outside, Captain Rowan Hale knelt beside a patch of disturbed snow. "The trail ended here," one guard said. Rowan touched the faint stain beneath the ice. "The king's blood." His gaze moved toward the abandoned orchard in the distance, but the falling snow had already buried every track leading toward Alara's cottage. "We search until dark," he ordered. Inside, Alara eventually fell asleep over her sewing. Cassian rose with difficulty and crossed the room. Her thin shawl had slipped from her shoulders. She shivered once, as cold air entered beneath the door. He caught the edge of the blanket near the fireplace between his teeth and dragged it across the floor. The wooden stool overturned behind him with a sharp crash. Alara woke immediately. Cassian froze with half the blanket hanging from his mouth. She stared at him. He stared back. Her gaze moved from the overturned stool to the blanket, and then to his deeply displeased expression. "Were you trying to cover me?" Cassian released the fabric. Alara's smile became soft enough to quiet something painful inside his chest. "That was very sweet." His ears flattened. "Do not worry," she whispered. "I will not tell anyone." She reached down and rested her hand against his neck. Warmth flashed beneath her palm. A thin silver circle appeared around her wrist, glowing once beneath the skin. Cassian's breath stopped. Alara looked down. What was that? Outside, somewhere beyond the orchard, a wolf answered with a distant howl. The silver circle around Alara's wrist vanished so quickly that she wondered whether the firelight had deceived her. She turned her hand beneath the morning glow. Her skin looked ordinary again, except for the faint warmth lingering beneath it. Cassian watched her closely. That was strange, she murmured. The black wolf lowered his head onto his paws, pretending he had no interest in the matter. Alara narrowed her eyes. You know something. One ear twitched. That is becoming your most suspicious habit. By breakfast, she had decided that allowing an enormous wounded animal to roam freely through her cottage required rules. She stood beside the fireplace with her hands folded solemnly in front of her. Cassian sat across from her, his silver eyes calm and unimpressed. Rule number 1, she said, you do not steal food. His gaze drifted toward the kitchen table. A slice of apple bread was missing. Alara followed his eyes. You already broke rule number 1. Cassian looked away. Rule number 2, no frightening visitors. His tail moved once across the floor. And rule number 3, you are not sleeping in my bed. Cassian lifted his head. Alara stared at him. Why did that rule offend you more than the others? He blinked slowly. That was not an invitation to negotiate. For the next several hours, Cassian behaved perfectly. Almost. He remained beside the hearth while Alara prepared dried herbs for the village healer. He did not steal the second slice of apple bread. He merely rested his chin on the table and stared at it until Alara became uncomfortable. You are a wolf, she reminded him. His eyes remained fixed on the bread. Wolves eat meat. No response. This contains cinnamon. His tail thumped once. Alara sighed and tore off a small piece. This is not a reward. This is a scientific experiment. Cassian accepted it with surprising delicacy. His expression remained dignified for nearly 3 seconds before his tail struck the cabinet. Alara laughed. The sound was light and unguarded, and Cassian felt it settle somewhere inside him that had been silent for years. Later that afternoon, Martha Bell arrived without warning. The older woman pushed open the door carrying a basket of eggs and stopped when she saw Cassian. Cassian rose at once. Martha stared at the wolf. The wolf stared back. Alara stepped between them. Martha, this is Soot. Cassian's eyes closed briefly. Soot? Martha repeated. He was covered in mud. Cassian gave Alara a wounded look. Martha studied him for another moment. He looks expensive. Alara frowned. How can a wolf look expensive? I have lived 61 years. Some creatures simply look like they have never paid for their own breakfast. Cassian's ears flattened. Alara covered a smile with her hand. Martha left shortly afterward, declaring that Soot had the manners of a duke and the expression of a disappointed husband. Once the door closed, Alara leaned against it and laughed until tears gathered in her eyes. Cassian huffed. Oh, do not be sensitive. She likes you. He followed her back toward the fire. For a while, the cottage settled into peaceful silence. Snow brushed softly against the windows. A pot of soup simmered above the flames, filling the room with rosemary and onions. Alara sat on the rug beside Cassian and repaired the tear in her woolen scarf. My former pack would have hated this, she said quietly. Cassian lifted his head. They believed Omegas should be quiet, graceful, and useful. She smiled without humor. I managed 2 out of 3 on good days. His gaze remained on her face. Alara's fingers slowed. There was someone once. He said he would choose me. She threaded the needle again. Then the council offered him a better match. She had stronger blood, a richer family, and a scent everyone noticed. The air around Cassian changed. A low growl rolled through the cottage. Alara looked at him in surprise. It happened years ago. The growl deepened. He did not hurt me. Cassian's claws pressed into the rug. Alara placed her hand gently between his ears. Honey and apple blossoms warmed the air. He simply made me feel easy to leave. The anger inside Cassian softened into something heavier. Alara leaned against his shoulder. But I survived, she whispered. And I am not as fragile as people decided I was. Cassian slowly rested his head across her lap. That night, Alara dreamed of a palace buried beneath snow. She stood alone before an empty throne, while the scent of cedar smoke filled the air. Somewhere beyond the tall doors, a wolf scratched desperately to reach her. Then a man's voice whispered through the darkness. Do not leave me. Alara woke beside the fire. Cassian was staring at her, and beneath her palm, his heartbeat matched her own. Alara woke to the scent of cedar smoke and winter rain. For one quiet moment, She believed she was still dreaming. Her hand rested against warm skin instead of fur, and the heartbeat beneath her palm remained slow, deep, and unmistakably human. Her eyes opened. A man lay beside the fireplace where the black wolf had been. Elara stopped breathing. He was large enough to make the old blanket look absurdly small. Dark hair had fallen across his forehead, and one powerful shoulder remained bandaged where she had treated the wolf's wound. Faint scars crossed his chest, silver beneath the morning light. Elara stared at him. Then she looked around the cottage. Soot? The stranger's eyes opened. Silver. Elara moved so quickly that she nearly tripped over the rug. She caught herself against the table, grabbed the nearest object, and pointed it at him with both hands. It was a frying pan. The man slowly sat up, holding the blanket around his waist. Elara, you know my name. His voice was rough with exhaustion. You told me. I told the wolf. A pause followed. The stranger glanced at the frying pan. Elara tightened her grip. Where is he? He is safe. That was not my question. Cassian had faced armed assassins with less determination than the small Omega standing before him in woolen stockings, sleep-tangled hair, and a pan held like a royal weapon. He is here, he said. Elara looked toward the door. Did you let him outside? No. Did you hurt him? Cassian's brows drew together. I would never hurt him. Then where is he? He released a slow breath. I am the wolf. Silence filled the cottage. A log cracked inside the fireplace. Elara lowered the pan by an inch. Then she raised it again. That is not funny. I was not joking. You expect me to believe that Soot turned into a man during the night? Cassian's jaw tightened at the name. Yes. And that man is you? Yes. You also expect me to believe that this is normal? No. His honesty unsettled her more than an elaborate lie would have. Elara studied him carefully. The bandage rested in the same place. The narrow scar above his left eye matched the pale line hidden beneath the wolf's fur, and when she stepped closer, she caught the same scent: cedarwood, cold pine, and the air before a storm. Her pan lowered slowly. You really are Soot. Cassian looked toward the window. I would prefer another name. Despite herself, a small laugh escaped her. His silver gaze returned to her face. For the first time, he looked less like a dangerous stranger and more like the deeply offended wolf who had refused his medicine. Elara set the pan down. Immediately, she picked up the fireplace poker instead. Cassian looked at it. This is not personal, she explained. I simply prefer being cautious around naked strangers who used to have 4 legs. I am not naked. You are wearing half a blanket. It is a complete blanket. Not from where I am standing. A faint warmth touched his expression. It was not quite a smile, but it softened something severe in his face. Elara turned away and opened the old storage chest. After searching through it, she found trousers and a shirt that had belonged to Martha's late husband. They may be a little small. Cassian accepted them with quiet dignity. The shirt was far more than a little small. When he stepped from behind the curtain, the fabric stretched across his shoulders so tightly that Elara pressed her lips together. Cassian noticed. You may laugh. I was not going to. You are already laughing. I am breathing strangely. His mouth almost curved. The gentleness of the moment faded when Elara noticed the dark veins spreading from beneath his bandage. She moved closer without thinking and pressed her fingers to his chest. Heat flashed beneath her palm. Cassian caught her wrist, not to stop her, but to steady himself. The silver circle appeared beneath her skin again. This time, it did not vanish. A second rhythm rose beneath Cassian's heartbeat, soft, distant, yet perfectly matched to her own. Elara looked up at him. What are you? Cassian's wolf stirred behind his silver eyes. My name is Cass, he said quietly. It was not the whole truth. Outside, hidden beyond the frosted window, a royal guard saw his king standing inside the Omega's cottage and turned his horse toward the palace. Cassian changed twice before noon. The first time, his fingers darkened into claws while Elara was replacing the bandage on his shoulder. The second time, black fur spread across his spine so quickly that the borrowed shirt split down the back with a soft, defeated sound. Elara stared at the ruined fabric. Cassian stared at the floor. That was Martha's favorite shirt, she said. His silver eyes lifted toward her. She said it made her husband look respectable. Cassian glanced down at the torn cloth hanging from one shoulder. It was not succeeding. Elara tried not to smile. She failed. The laughter eased some of the fear inside the cottage, but it did not remove the questions. Dark veins still moved beneath Cassian's skin whenever the poison stirred. His body could no longer decide whether it belonged to the man or the wolf. Alara guided him toward the chair beside the fire. Sit. I am fine. You turned into half a wolf while standing beside my soup. Cassian sat. She knelt in front of him and loosened the bandage. The wound had begun to close, but the flesh around it remained unnaturally cold. My grandmother used to tell me that poison always left a trail, Alara murmured, even when it wanted to hide. Cassian watched her fingers move carefully over his shoulder. You should stay away from this. From the wound? From me. Ilara's hand stopped. The fire crackled behind them. Outside, melting snow dripped steadily from the roof. You do not get to decide that for me, she said softly. Cassian's expression tightened. You also do not get to keep giving me pieces of the truth and expecting me to be grateful. Ilara. No. Her voice remained gentle, but it carried enough firmness to silence a council chamber. I brought you into my home. I cleaned your blood from my floor. I argued with you over medicine. I even allowed you to eat my apple bread. You gave me one piece. You stared at it for 20 minutes. Cassian looked away. Alara tied the fresh bandage in place. I do not need every secret, she continued, but I need to know whether the man sleeping beside my fireplace is dangerous to me. Cassian looked back at her. Never to you. The certainty in his voice made her heartbeat stumble. He lowered his gaze toward the silver circle around her wrist. I have spent most of my life being needed, he said, after a long silence. People needed decisions, protection, strength. They needed me to stand when I was tired and speak when I wanted silence. Ilara remained still. No one ever asked what it cost, he continued, and I stopped expecting them to. The words were simple, but she heard the loneliness beneath them. She rested her hand over his. You are allowed to be tired here. Cassian's fingers slowly closed around hers. For one quiet moment, the cottage seemed to breathe with them. Then a heavy drip landed on Ilara's head. She blinked. Another drop struck her nose. Cassian looked toward the ceiling. Ilara sighed. The roof. An hour later, Cassian stood on a ladder outside the cottage, insisting he knew how to repair it. He did not. Ilara watched from below while he placed an entire row of wooden shingles at a noticeable angle. Cass? Yes? Are Royal Scouts trained in roofing? His hands paused. No. I had begun to suspect that. The corner of his mouth moved. She climbed halfway up the ladder and handed him the hammer. Wind lifted loose strands of her hair, carrying the scent of honey and apple blossoms around him. Cassian went very still. Ilara looked up. What? Nothing. You are staring. I am thinking. Does thinking usually involve forgetting how to breathe? His gaze dropped to her mouth. The warmth between them deepened. The bond hummed beneath her skin, soft as distant music. Cassian leaned closer before he seemed to catch himself. His hand tightened around the ladder. Ilara, he whispered. She did not move away. But Cassian did. He stepped back carefully, his expression strained. What happened? She asked. The bond may be influencing you. And if it is not? His eyes closed briefly. Then I would still rather wait than take something you did not freely choose. The tenderness of the answer hurt more than a kiss might have. Before Ilara could respond, horses sounded beyond the orchard. Cassian turned sharply. Several armed riders emerged between the trees. At their head was a broad-shouldered man in a dark royal cloak. He dismounted, crossed the snow, and dropped to one knee before Cassian. Your Majesty, Captain Rowan Hale said, the kingdom is falling apart without you. For several seconds, the orchard seemed to lose every sound. Snow drifted between the bare apple trees. The repaired shingles creaked above Ilara's head. Somewhere near the cottage, water continued dripping from the roof into a metal bucket with soft, patient taps. Captain Rowan Hale remained on one knee. Your Majesty, he repeated, the kingdom is falling apart without you. Ilara slowly looked at Cassian. He stood beside the ladder in Martha's undersized shirt, holding a hammer in one hand. Only moments earlier, he had been arguing with her about crooked roof tiles. Not hand. Now, armed royal guards bowed before him. The hammer slipped from Cassian's fingers and landed in the snow. Ilara, he began. She climbed down from the ladder without looking away from him. Your Majesty? The title sounded small in her voice. Painful. Cassian dismissed the guards with one sharp glance. Rowan rose, but he kept his distance. I was going to tell you. When? Cassian had no answer. Ilara folded her arms across her chest, though the gesture did little to protect the ache spreading beneath her ribs. After I gave you another bath? she asked, or after you finish destroying the rest of Martha's clothing? Rowan looked down quickly. One of the younger guards coughed into his glove. Cassian did not smile. My name is Cassian Veilheart, he said quietly. I am the Alpha King of Northreach. Ilara glanced toward the cottage. The old blanket remained visible through the doorway. His empty medicine bowl sat beside the hearth. Everything inside looked exactly as it had that morning, yet none of it felt the same. You let me call you Soot. I tried to object. You twitched your ears. It was the only method available to me. The answer was so familiar, so painfully him, that Ilara nearly laughed. She did not. You listened while I told you everything, she whispered. My old pack, the man who left, the reason I came here. Cassian stepped closer. You were the first person who trusted me without knowing my crown. And you trusted me with nothing. The words stopped him. Ilara's eyes burned, but she refused to lower them. I do not care that you are a king, she said. I care that you knew who I was while I knew only the person you decided to show me. Cassian's face tightened. The lie kept you safe. No, it kept you comfortable. Rowan shifted uneasily, but neither of them noticed. Cassian had faced accusations from rival rulers without flinching. Ilara's disappointment cut deeper because she had earned the truth. My enemies poisoned me, he said. If they discovered where I was, they would come here. They may come anyway. Yes, the single word settled heavily between them. Rowan finally stepped forward. Your Majesty, the council has demanded your return before tomorrow's full moon. Lord Varric is preparing to declare you unfit to rule. Cassian's wolf pushed against his skin at the thought of leaving Ilara. The bond around her wrist warmed, answering his distress. Ilara covered the silver circle with her sleeve. You should go. His gaze sharpened. I will not leave you unprotected. You already brought royal guards to my orchard. I suspect subtlety has ended. A young guard looked guiltily at the row of horses, blocking her garden path. One of them had begun eating her rosemary. Ilara pointed toward it. That one is destroying my winter herbs. The guard rushed to pull the horse away. Under any other circumstances, Cassian might have smiled. Instead, he moved close enough for only Ilara to hear. The cottage was the first place in years where I was not required to be king. Her expression softened despite herself. That does not excuse the lie. No. He reached for her hand, then stopped before touching it. I will return. Ilara looked toward the forest. Kings usually say that before leaving. I am not speaking as your king. Cassian's voice lowered. I am speaking as the man who slept beside your fire and stole your apple bread. You admitted it. I believe the evidence was overwhelming. A fragile smile touched her lips and disappeared. Before sunset, Cassian rode toward the capital with Rowan and the royal guard. He looked back until the cottage vanished behind the trees. Ilara stood in the orchard long after the sound of horses faded. His old blanket was still wrapped around her shoulders. That night, someone pounded on her door. Ilara opened it to find 6 soldiers wearing royal colors. Their captain unrolled a sealed order. Ilara Wren, he announced, you are under arrest for using forbidden magic to control the Alpha King. Ilara stared at the royal seal. Then she noticed the wax was black. Cassian's seal had always been silver. Behind the soldiers, something moved between the apple trees, and a familiar scent of cedar smoke drifted through the cold. Ilara looked from the black wax seal to the soldiers surrounding her porch. The royal colors were correct. The silver wolves embroidered across their cloaks were almost perfect, but Cassian's seal had been pressed in pale silver wax, not black. Someone had expected her to be frightened enough not to notice. The cedar scent in the cold air came from the blanket around her shoulders. It still carried Cassian's warmth, and for one quiet heartbeat, it made her feel less alone. I need my coat, she said. The captain frowned. You are wearing one. This is a blanket. It appears warm. It also appears to belong beside a fireplace. One of the younger soldiers looked as though he agreed, but the captain silenced him with a glance. Ilara stepped inside. Before anyone could follow, she slipped Martha's small herb knife into her sleeve and tucked Cassian's wooden medicine spoon into her pocket. She did not know why she took the spoon. Perhaps every woman facing false imprisonment deserved one familiar weapon, even if hers had previously been used to threaten a stubborn wolf with bitter medicine. The journey to Veilheart Palace lasted through the night. By dawn, dark towers rose beyond the snow-covered hills, their windows glowing gold beneath a pale sky. The palace was larger than anything Ilara had imagined. It looked carved from winter itself, beautiful, cold, and impossible to approach without feeling very small. Servants paused as she passed. Nobles whispered behind jeweled hands. That is her? She barely has a scent. She enchanted him? Alara kept walking. Her boots were still stained with orchard mud, and one corner of Cassian's blanket trailed behind her like a tired royal cape. A woman in a silver gown stood beside the great hall doors. Lady Malys Ravencourt was tall, graceful, and so perfectly composed that Alara immediately became aware of the loose strand of hair stuck to her cheek. Malys examined her. You are not what the council expected. Alara adjusted the blanket. They have disappointed me as well. Something almost amused flickered in Malys's eyes before the doors opened. The council chamber was filled with carved pillars, winter banners, and men who looked as though they had never been told no. Lord Varric Kells sat nearest the empty throne. Alara Wren, he announced, you are accused of using forbidden Omega magic to weaken the Alpha King. I used willow bark. A murmur moved through the chamber. Varric's expression cooled. You expect us to believe simple herbs subdued the strongest Alpha in Northreach? No. Chicken broth helped. Someone near the back coughed to hide a laugh. Varric rose. You entered his mind. You made him abandon his duties. Alara's fingers closed around the spoon in her pocket. I found an injured wolf in the snow. I treated his wound and gave him somewhere warm to sleep. You expect this court to believe you did not know who he was? I named him Soot. This time, the laugh came from Captain Rowan, who had just entered through a side door. Every guard in the chamber straightened. Then Cassian appeared behind him. He wore black formal clothing fastened with silver at the throat. A narrow crown rested against his dark hair, but it was not the crown that changed the room. It was the silence that followed him. His silver eyes found Alara immediately. They moved over her face, the blanket, the soldiers surrounding her, and finally the black wax seal in Varric's hand. The air turned sharp with cedar and gathering thunder. Who authorized her arrest? Cassian asked. Varric bowed. The council acted for your protection. You forged my seal. We feared she had influenced your judgment. Cassian descended the steps slowly. The soldiers near Alara moved aside before he reached them. One noblewoman whispered, she is only an Orchard Omega. Cassian stopped. The power in his gaze swept through the hall so strongly that several councilmen lowered their heads. She treated me when your healers could not find me, he said. She stood beside me when I had no title to offer her, and she protected a creature she believed could give her nothing in return. He turned toward Alara. His expression softened, though his voice carried to every corner of the chamber. She did not come here seeking a crown. Cassian stepped beside her, publicly placing himself between Alara and the council. I brought the crown to her door. The bond around Alara's wrist flared silver. For one heartbeat, warmth rushed through her. Then Cassian staggered. Dark veins spread above his collar. His crown struck the marble floor as the Alpha King fell to one knee, and a low, inhuman growl shook the entire hall. The growl that rolled through the council chamber did not sound human. Cassian's hands struck the marble floor. His fingers lengthened into black claws, tearing through the sleeves of his formal coat. Dark fur spread across his shoulders as the poison surged beneath his skin. Clear the hall, Captain Rowan shouted. The nobles rushed backward, chairs overturned, silk skirts swept across the floor, and guards formed a circle around their king with silver-tipped spears raised. Alara did not move. Where Cassian had knelt moments earlier, the enormous black wolf now stood beneath the winter banners. His back nearly reached the shoulders of the nearest guards. Silver light flashed across the narrow streak on his chest, while dark veins pulsed beneath his fur. His eyes were no longer calm. They burned with pain, confusion, and the terrible instinct to destroy anything that came near him. A councilman stumbled. Cassian's head snapped toward the sound. Do not run, Rowan warned. The man ran. Cassian lunged. Rowan threw himself between them, lifting his sword only to block, never to strike. The wolf's shoulder sent him sliding across the marble. Your Majesty, Rowan called. Cassian did not recognize him. The poison had buried the man beneath the beast. A guard lowered his spear. Alara caught the wooden shaft before he could aim it. No, he will kill someone. He is frightened. The guard stared at her, as though she had lost all sense. Across the chamber, Cassian bared his teeth. His scent filled the room. Cedar smoke drowned beneath the sharp bitterness of wolfsbane and fear. Alara felt the bond burn around her wrist. Not anger. Pain. His pain rushed into her so suddenly that she nearly fell. She felt years of sleepless nights, the weight of the crown, and the loneliness of a man who had never been allowed to collapse. Cassian backed toward the throne, claws scraping the floor. Every weapon followed him. Elara stepped forward. Rowan pushed himself upright. Elara, stop. She took another step. The Black Wolf's gaze locked onto her. A growl vibrated through the marble beneath her boots. Several guards raised their spears higher. If anyone harms him, Elara said softly, I will become extremely unpleasant. Rowan looked briefly at the wooden spoon sticking out of her pocket. Despite the danger, his mouth twitched. I have seen the spoon, he told the guards. Lower your weapons. They obeyed reluctantly. Elara continued across the hall. Cassian's lips pulled back. I know, she whispered. You are very frightening. His ears shifted. The smallest movement. She loosened the blanket from her shoulders and let it fall behind her. Honey, chamomile, and apple blossoms warmed the cold air. Cassian inhaled. His claws pressed harder into the marble, but he did not attack. Elara stopped a few feet away. The wolf towered above her. Blood darkened the fur near his shoulder, and foam gathered along one side of his mouth. He looked powerful enough to tear through an army. She saw only the creature who had lain beneath the apple trees, fighting not to hurt anyone. Oh, she murmured. Her eyes softened. You poor darling. The entire chamber went still. Cassian's growl broke. His head lowered by an inch. Elara stepped closer and lifted one hand. You have made a terrible mess, she told him gently, and I am fairly certain you have ruined another shirt. One black ear twitched. Somewhere behind her, Rowan released a quiet breath. Elara touched the silver streak on Cassian's chest. The bond opened. Warm light burst beneath her palm and raced around her wrist. Her scent rolled through the hall, no longer faint or hidden. Apple blossoms filled the chamber as though spring had entered the heart of winter. Ancient symbols carved into the pillars began to glow. Lady Mela stared at them. Hearth Moon, she whispered. Cassian shuddered. The poison fought him, darkening his eyes once more. Elara placed both hands against his face and pressed her forehead gently to his. Come back, she said. You are safe. His breathing slowed. Once. Twice. Then the Alpha King lowered his massive body to the floor and rested his head in Alara's lap. A stunned silence followed. Elara stroked the fur between his ears. There, she whispered, much more dignified. His tail struck the marble once. A startled laugh moved through the guards. Behind them, Lord Varric stepped quietly toward a concealed door. When Elara finally looked up, the councilman was gone. A sweet, unfamiliar cloth pressed over her mouth from behind. The glowing hall tilted. The last thing she saw was Cassian's silver eyes opening as Varric dragged her into the darkness beneath the palace. Elara woke to cold stone beneath her cheek and the bitter scent of black wolfsbane. A single torch burned inside the narrow chamber, casting restless shadows across shelves filled with glass bottles. Iron pipes disappeared into the walls, carrying the distant murmur of water beneath the palace. Lord Varric stood beside a wooden table, calmly removing his gloves. You should feel honored, he said. The Hearthmoon bloodline was believed extinct. Elara pushed herself upright. Her wrists had been tied, but not tightly enough to stop her fingers from moving. I have never found kidnapping especially honorable. Varric's mouth tightened. Your blood can control an alpha's wolf. Any teen? No, she said. Kindness helped him. Kindness is simply power used by people too frightened to name it. Elara studied the bottles behind him. Wolfsbane, Silverroot, Moonmint, and crushed feverfew. He had built the poison from the same family of herbs she used for healing, only twisted into something cruel. Varric turned toward the table. With your blood, I can bind every alpha in Northreach. Kings will kneel, because I command it, not because an old council approves. Elara quietly pulled Martha's herb knife from her sleeve. You have made one mistake. He glanced back. You believe Cassian kneels easily. The knife cut through the rope around one wrist. Varric moved toward her, but Elara seized a bottle of Silverroot and threw it into the brazier. Pale smoke exploded through the chamber. He coughed and stumbled. Elara ran. The underground passage twisted beneath the palace like a buried river. Her bare palms slid along the damp wall while footsteps followed behind her. She reached into her pocket and found the wooden medicine spoon. For one terrible second, she nearly laughed. Of course, she whispered. I brought a spoon to a kidnapping. Still, the shallow bowl held traces of dried moonmint. She scraped the herb along the stone as she ran, leaving a scent only a powerful wolf would notice. Far above, Cassian tore through the hidden door. He had shifted fully again. The poison still burned through him, but Alara's fear traveled along the mate bond like a silver thread pulling him forward. Moon mint, honey, apple blossoms, hair. He followed the trail into the darkness. Varric caught Alara near an underground bridge crossing a black channel of water. His hand closed around her arm and dragged her backward. You were supposed to be insignificant, he hissed. Alara drove the wooden spoon into his injured hand. Varric shouted and released her. I told you, she said breathlessly. It is a very useful spoon. A roar shook dust from the ceiling. Cassian emerged from the passage like a living shadow. He struck Varric before the older man could reach for his blade. Both crashed against the stone railing. Cassian's claws closed around Varric's throat. The bond flooded Alara with his rage. Not only for her. For every poisoned night, every betrayal, every moment he had believed his weakness was his own failure. Cassian. He did not hear her. Varric's face darkened beneath his grip. Alara stepped closer, despite the wild scent of thunder filling the passage. Cassian, look at me. His silver eyes turned toward her, but the wolf still burned behind them. He deserves judgment, she said softly, not your soul. Varric struggled beneath him. Alara rested her hand against Cassian's shoulder. Honey and apple blossoms warmed the cold air. You came back to me, she whispered. Now let me bring you back, too. Cassian's claws slowly withdrew. Captain Rowan and the royal guards arrived moments later. They bound Varric in silver chains and carried him toward the council chamber. By sunrise, the entire court had gathered. Varric's records, poisons, and forged seals lay across the council table. Lady Malis stood beside Alara and confirmed every hidden payment he had made. When silence finally settled, Cassian crossed the hall. He stopped before Alara. Then the Alpha King of Northreach lowered himself to one knee. Gasps moved through the chamber. Cassian took her hand carefully. I will not command this bond, he said. I will not use my crown, my wolf, or what you feel for me to take away your choice. Alara's eyes filled with warmth. Then what are you asking? His thumb brushed the silver circle around her wrist. I am asking whether you would choose me freely. Alara smiled through the tears gathering in her eyes. Yes. The bond flared between them. Cassian's breath caught as dark veins climbed suddenly above his collar. The Hearthmoon priestess rushed forward and touched his chest. Her face paled. The poison has reached his heart, she said. If the bond is not completed before dawn tomorrow, the Alpha King will die. The priestess's warning followed them all the way back to Larkspur Hollow. By the time Cassian and Alara reached the abandoned orchard, the moon had risen above the apple trees. Silver light rested across the snow, while the cottage windows glowed with the same warm firelight that had welcomed a wounded black wolf only days earlier. Cassian could barely stand. The poison had spread beneath his skin in dark, branching lines. Each breath came slowly, and his scent of cedar and winter pine had grown faint beneath the bitter trace of wolfsbane. Alara tightened her arm around his waist. We are almost there. You have said that 6 times. And yet you are still complaining. I find that encouraging. A weak smile touched his mouth. Rowan and the Hearthmoon priestess followed several steps behind them, but neither entered the cottage. The final choice had to belong to Alara and Cassian alone. Inside, the fire crackled softly. The old chair still leaned slightly to one side. A chipped bowl remained near the hearth, and Cassian's blanket lay folded where Alara had left it. His gaze settled on the room. This was the first place I felt safe, he said. Alara looked up at him. You growled at me. I was poisoned. You also refused your medicine. That was judgment. It was broth. It was suspicious broth. Her laugh trembled with tears. Cassian reached for her hand, but his knees suddenly weakened. Alara lowered him carefully beside the fire. For one frightening moment, he could not catch his breath. She knelt before him and touched his face. What must we do? He asked. The priestess said the bond would complete only if both of us chose it without fear. Cassian's silver eyes searched hers. Alara, you do not owe me your life because you saved mine. I know. You do not owe me a crown. I do not want one. His mouth curved faintly. That may become inconvenient. She took both his hands. I do not choose the king, she whispered. I choose the stubborn wolf who stole my bread, ruined Martha's shirt, and dragged a blanket across the floor because he thought I was cold. Cassian's eyes softened. And I choose the woman who looked at me when I had nothing to offer and saw someone worth saving. The silver circle around Alara's wrist began to glow. Cassian lifted her hand to his chest. His heartbeat was weak beneath her palm. Alara leaned forward until her forehead rested against his. "I choose you freely," she said. The bond opened. Warmth rushed through the cottage, carrying the scent of honey, apple blossoms, cedar, and fresh snow. Silver light circled their joined hands and moved through Cassian's chest. It gasped. The dark veins beneath his skin began to fade. For one breathless moment, Alara felt everything he had carried: the loneliness of the throne, the fear of losing control, the quiet longing for a place where he did not need to be strong. Then Cassian felt her in return. Her old rejection, her fear of being easy to leave, her kindness, not as weakness, but as a strength no crown could create. The bond did not erase their wounds. It simply made certain neither carried them alone again. Cassian's breathing steadied. Color returned to his face. Outside, the first pale light of dawn touched the orchard. He opened his eyes. Silver, clear, and fully himself. Alara released a shaking laugh and wrapped her arms around him. "You are alive." Cassian held her close. "Your surprise is slightly insulting, Annie. You were being very dramatic. I was dying. You still managed to argue about broth. A king must preserve standards." Months later, the great hall of Veilheart Palace filled with wolves from every territory. Cassian stood before the kingdom in black and silver. Beside him, Alara wore no jewels, except the glowing mate mark around her wrist. When the council announced her as Luna, whispers moved through the nobles who had once called her insignificant. Alara met their eyes without lowering her own. Cassian did not give her value by placing a crown upon her head. He simply made the kingdom recognize what had always been there. Together, they turned the old orchard into a refuge for Omegas who had been rejected, silenced, or forgotten. No one who arrived there was asked what bloodline they carried before being offered food, warmth, and a place to rest. Cassian kept his palace. Alara kept her cottage. And whenever the crown became too heavy, the Alpha King returned to Larkspur Hollow in the shape of a giant black wolf. One winter evening, Alara found him stretched before the fire with her favorite blanket beneath him. "That belongs to me." Cassian closed his eyes. "Do not pretend to be asleep." His tail struck the floor once. "Alpha King or not, there are rules in this house." The tail moved again. Alara smiled and sat beside him, resting her hand between his ears. Long before she became his Luna, she had looked at the loneliest wolf in Northreach, called him poor darling, and given the Alpha King the one thing no kingdom ever had: a home. So, this is where Alara and Cassian's story finally closes. Are you still here with me, after everything they went through? Then perhaps this story touched a place in you that still remembers what it felt like to be betrayed, misunderstood, or made to question your own worth. Alara was hurt, but she did not beg to be chosen. She stepped back, protected her heart, and refused to trade her dignity for an explanation that came too late. That does not mean she stopped loving. It meant she stopped abandoning herself. There is a quiet kind of strength in accepting what you cannot control. You cannot force someone to be honest. You cannot make them recognize your value. Subscribed, but you can choose how long you remain where your heart is treated carelessly. And yes, walking away can feel lonely. Even Alpha Kings look rather pathetic when left alone with a stolen blanket. But choosing yourself is not cruelty. It is the moment you remember that love should meet you with truth, respect, and courage. If this message stayed with you, comment just one word, dignity, and gently like, share, and subscribe so we can meet again in the next story.